Hello everyone and welcome to Dark Aspects, a web series where I take a look at the family-friendly games of Nintendo's history from the perspective of an adult, to uncover any heavier storytelling or morbid jokes the developers may have snuck in. I can't tell you how excited I've been to cover the remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, because the GameCube original was filled to the brim with so many non-Mario things that it'd make your priest, your rabbi, and your minister collectively gasp in shock. Rogueport is not your father's Mario hub world. It's a filthy thieves' den with a noose literally hanging out in the town square. I was worried intelligent systems would remove the gallows or something for the Switch version, but they made it interactive instead. And Nintendo even allowed an NSO subscriber to use it as the background of their profile picture. Before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about the prep work I did for this project. It took me a little over 50 hours to complete the TTYD remake 100%. That may seem a little long, but I was incredibly thorough with the playthrough. This may just be Mario's most text-dense RPG ever. In addition to there being tons of townsfolk and side characters that get new lines of dialogue in between chapters, Goombella, your first partner, has something to say about each and every one of them via her tattle ability. And that's not even static either. Her descriptions sometimes change depending on what's happening in the story. Goombella has fresh commentary for every single screen, with flavor text for even a small room you'd otherwise spend 2 seconds in. She'll speak when certain events unfold during cutscenes, of course, but if you have any of the other partners out instead, they'll react differently depending on their personality. For example, Professor Frankly will reference the phrase, "When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me," before cutting himself off and stating that, well, you know the saying. Goombella will admit that she doesn't actually know what he's talking about. But Madame Flurrie, an older, refined lady with a design that just screams Eve for everyone, will comment about it being inappropriate. Then there's extra side stories told by gossipers, minstrels, dreamers, and brothers that add to the lore of an already lore-rich game. I don't recommend playing the way I did to try and absorb all of this text in the span of a couple of weeks or so, but despite a bit of fatigue, I am in awe at the sheer amount of world building that never feels like a waste of time to learn about. Anything I talk about today is based on information pulled directly from the game's script. And since there is so much to talk about, with TTYD being much darker than your typical Mario adventure, I will be splitting this video project up into several parts. What you're about to watch now covers the history of Rogueport, as well as the prologue to the end of Chapter 2, but I will be jumping around to later parts of the game when relevant, so be warned, there will be overall plot spoilers right away. If you've never experienced the original and don't know what happens, I recommend stopping here, and coming back once you've played it or the Switch version. With that out of the way though, let's begin this deep dive into one of my top 5 favorite video games of all time, to discuss why this is a candidate for darkest Mario game ever. Our tale begins with an actual storybook that would make for a fairly harrowing bedtime story. An awfully long time, aka 1 millennium ago, there was a prosperous town where people lived happily, and I guess the waters were always infested with nibbles. But tragically, a great cataclysm struck and brought the lively town to utter ruin in a single day, sinking it down into the depths of the earth. According to the old legends of Rogueport as told by Grifty, this sudden destruction was not due to natural disasters, but caused by a demon from the dark beyond, the Shadow Queen. A quarter of the old city became the demon's den, the Palace of Shadow, and from this cursed place the queen sent out her minions, the evil Shadow Beldam being one of them, to conquer the land. In an effort to further increase her power, this tyrant created the crystal stars to hold the essence of the heavens. These stars were then scattered across the map to exert her influence, and Hooktail Castle was one of the castles constructed to contain them. Hooktail the dragon and her 2 siblings stated to be the queen's pets, who spread fear and sorrow everywhere they go. Even the Pit of 100 Trials has a backstory. It was built by Her Majesty as a dungeon she could throw anyone she disliked into, so that they may rot or succumb to the monsters she's filled it with. 1,000 years ago, it was not a mustached plumber who saved the world, but a toad hero, and his 3 companions, a wise Goomba, a stalwart, scar-riddled Koopa, and a magic-using Boo destined to challenge the oppressive, all-powerful queen. Sadly, they were no match for her might, so the Goomba of their group had the idea of stealing the queen's crystal stars and using them against her, which successfully damaged the demon. However, it wasn't going to be enough to end her reign, so the team decided to use the power of the stars to seal her away instead. They all managed to banish the queen to the deepest reaches of the palace. But before she was sealed for good, she cursed the 4 of them so that the moment they stopped touching the crystal stars, a black box would appear to seal their souls within. The heroes opted to spread out across the world to scatter the 7 stars once more, in the hope that the seal would remain. The last 4 stars carried the curse though, which ultimately claimed each hero. The Goomba and Boo heroines were able to reach their destinations, resting their stars in the Great Tree and Creepy Steeple respectively, but the Koopa hero had his stolen by the Pirate King Cortez, while the Toad hero collapsed from exhaustion and had to entrust it to a traveling healer to hide for him. Nevertheless, when they let go of the stars, their spirits were all sealed inside of black chests, the very same ones that quote-unquote curse Mario with helpful abilities. As far as why they present themselves as malevolent beings who deceive Mario, my theory is that a condition of their own curse is to hex whoever frees their souls, so they all bestow Mario with new powers cleverly disguised as malicious tricks to elude the Shadow Queen and help whip her but good. With the Demon Queen only sealed, no one dared go near the palace door out of fear for her return. However, as the years passed, the story faded into legend, and many generations later the abandoned area began to attract the penniless and the immoral. Rogueport, the main setting of this game, was built on the remains of the fallen city, and rumors began circulating about a treasure hidden in the underground ruins. But some know the truth, that in her house at the palace, dead Shadow Queen waits dreaming. Knowing that her seal might not last forever, the 4 heroes of old created a magical map to the stars for a future hero, placing it in a special box that could only be opened by the pure of heart. Beldam eventually found said box, and in the modern day tricked Peach into opening it, but because the town square had too many prying eyes, she failed to both kidnap the princess and take the map back, so now it's in Mario's possession. I find it hilarious that Beldam was basically scared of old Toadsworth, so the X-Nauts, led by Sir Grotus, who desires to collect the crystal stars and break the seal to awaken the demon, then offer up Peach as a vessel, had to steal her away when Toadsworth wasn't looking. Wonky, the information peddler, admits that he was likely the only person who witnessed them taking her, and appropriately feels bad about not saying anything until his conversation with Mario. In the English GameCube version script, he instead says, "People get kidnapped, whatever," which is disturbingly nonchalant. I can see why the localizers removed that line for Switch. I'm surprised and delighted about all the changes they didn't make though. The Rogueport of today is still the seediest locale Mario's ever visited. You got a Goomba who's constantly getting scammed, and talks about being defrauded with a fake credit card. There's a Dugan, a species unique to Paper Mario, who seeks out shady jobs for easy money and has probably never done an honest day's work in his life. Within the first 10 minutes of taking control of everyone's favorite plumber, Mario's mugged by a bandit who steals half of his coins and hides out in a disgusting, roach-infested house filled with trash and questionable wall stains. In the Japanese GameCube version only, a chalk outline of a toad can very surprisingly be found drawn on his floor, complete with what looks like a dried pool of blood near his head. There are plenty more thieves hiding out from the law in this area, and even a Goomba fixer, who can make any problem just go away. The Help Wanted Trouble Center quest takes this further, revealing that he not only discreetly disposes of things, but people too. The very first NPC you can interact with is a Babam, who talks about how, in these times of violence, you never know when you're going to kick the old bucket. Then in that same harbor, this toad unloads onto Mario the fact that he's given up on all of his life's dreams, and now just stares out into the sea, depressed. Life stinks, you know that? Most everyone who isn't a crook warns you about them, or vents about their own grievances with Rogueport. Even the people who occupy the nicer, for Rogueport, west side of town aren't happy. Take this troubled Toad family, consisting of a married couple and their 2 children, for instance. The mother is obsessed with the local parlor and can be seen playing there all hours of every day instead of spending time with any of her loved ones. She shamelessly sings about how, if and when the family wants to eat, they all just go buy their own food. It's so sad because one of her boys talks about how it would be nice if they could all eat dinner together for once, but they never do. They don't spend any time with each other at all. The father is an author who's been struggling with writer's block and thinks the solution is to travel the world on his own for inspiration, but opts to stay home fantasizing about it instead while continuing to write bad novels that never sell. The two brothers don't get along because one of them never leaves the house, since, Rogueport is scary and filled with weirdos, while the other wanders outside, not looking back because it's boring at home, and his parents don't appear to care where he's at anyway. The father does worry about his son who stays inside all the time becoming warped, but he doesn't do anything about it. That is, until he stops selfishly daydreaming about traveling alone, and decides to take everyone on a vacation. And while we don't see Mario scolding the mom, her dialogue implies that he did speak up about their situation, as she says, "What? You say my kids have it rough?" After belting out a song about how they can handle being independent, the mom finally admits that she should pay a little more attention to them. Maybe. It isn't until the end of the game, but thankfully this side story does have a happy ending. After a much-needed family getaway, Mama Toad realizes the value of being present in their lives, and even cooks them lots of spaghetti. It also did have a rejuvenating effect on the Papa, as he becomes motivated enough to write a book about Mario's quest he dubs Paper Mario. It's cool because the play Madame Flurrie stars in post-game is an interpretation of this Toad's novel. The depressed, albeit rich Koopa who lives next door cooped up in bed all throughout the game was moved after reading this disturbing story of Mario's adventure too, and agrees to finance the upcoming movie adaptation as an executive producer, finally providing him happiness with an opportunity to be productive. It's nice everything wound up working well for these folks, but it sure did take a long time. These poor Toad kids deserve to be happy. While we're here on the west side, this area of Rogueport is controlled by the Piantas, a species returning from Super Mario Sunshine, though unlike the paradise that is Isle Delfino, the few Piantas who live in this shabby town belong to a crime ring known as the Pianta Syndicate. The Pianta Parlor I was just referring to, where the Toad mother wastes her days away, that's a front for the Syndicate head's business. These gangsters are comparable to real-world Yakuza, but more so the Sicilian Mafia, also known as the Italian Mob or simply the Mafia, as evidenced by the Italian names of its members, who all refer to their boss as the Don. This leader also goes by the title Dawn of Untimely Death, while the names for him in other languages are based around the combination of the infamous Al Capone with the Godfather films
Don Corleone, give me justice.
Their outfits are also clearly mobster, with a black suit, fedora, sunglasses combo, with the hilarious twist that they're all also rocking a grass skirt, signature to Piantas. Silliness and appearance aside, this gang is said to be violent, as shown early on during Goombella's introduction, where a couple of members can be seen jumping a craw of the rival East Side Rogueport gang, the Robos. The implications of their ongoing turf war is quite shocking, considering the fact that there are staked skulls leading to both territories in town, and on the bridge in the East Side. This brutality is often depicted in media as warnings for trespassers, or as trophies of war, stemming in inspiration from real-world examples throughout human history. Speaking of historical relevance, the European GameCube version removed one of two reaction animations for Mario where he raises a single arm up into the air. This was obviously not the intention, but it likely resembled the Nazi salute enough to be taken out by their localization team, and the fact that it was replaced entirely for all regions in the Switch version is at least worth mentioning. Let's step outside of this seedy sailor town for a breath of fresh air in Petal Meadows though. That is, before storming a gnarly sewer to unlock the path to Hooktail Castle. That's right, the first chapter boss is one of the Shadow Queen's pet dragons, who's been wreaking havoc on the hapless Koopa citizens of Petalburg for quite some time now. Hooktail loves devouring innocents, and one Toad wonders what her all-time record is. We at least know she recently lunched on Old Man Skoo 2 villages over, and Mayor Kroop claims that the fly-by snackings have them all on pins and needles. This dialogue, paired with the hundreds of Koopa skeletons in her castle, make me certain that her death count is astonishingly high. Koops, a future party member, has been especially traumatized by Hooktail's reign of terror because 1 decade ago, his dad marched off to the monster's dwelling to confront her. He never made it back, however, so he's been a missing Koopa ever since. Koops ultimately wants to avenge him, but he also wishes to finish what his old man started for the sake of his fellow villagers. Koop's girlfriend, Koopy Koo, desperately wants him to stay behind out of fear of him being eaten too, but the once timid turtle pushes forward and leaves without her blessing. Well, you can head straight to the castle from here, but backtracking to speak with her reveals that she will, in fact, support his decision, so that's nice. Something particularly morbid happens soon upon entering the dragon's domain. A pile of Koopa bones reminds Koops of his father, and to be fair, the only distinguishing feature between these dull bones here and those dull bones over there are the blue shoes, his dad's signature color. He thinks the corpse is that of his father, but quickly discovers he's made a mistake. A letter the late Koopa's bony hand clutches has last words addressed to his son, Colorado, the explorer from the Nintendo 64 Paper Mario. We see firsthand the grim fate of the father of a character our heroes come to know quite well. So if they ever cross paths again, Mario's going to have to break the news that his daddy's become a dragon's chew toy. Koops is embarrassed he misidentified his old man, and very sadly wonders if the other pile of bones across the room is actually him. You know, maybe he's the ominously red one Goombella says is super creepy that proceeds to reanimate itself and threaten Mario. Hundreds of dull bones then drop from the ceiling, which is, again, really disturbing because all of them are undead Koopas who probably perished here. If you, the player, put the controller down, Mario and his partner will just ride the gray wave until they're thrown out of the room, which makes his threat that Mario will be nothing but bones from this moment on pretty empty. Later on in the Palace of Shadow, there's a similar sequence involving the much tougher Dark Bones, who's there to halt those who would awaken the Shadow Queen. Instead of Red Bones not wanting his skeleton crew disturbed, the Dark Bones here decrees that anyone who disturbs her will fall into the depths of endless darkness. And this dude's true to his word. Not fighting back against this ocean of fallen Koopas pulls Mario to the center of the room, where a black hole, we can actually see in the Switch remake, opens up in the floor to swallow him whole. This results in a series staple, the non-standard game over, which first appears back at Hooktail Castle actually. Specifically this room, that looks like it was used to contain and torture prisoners. There's an obvious trap of a treasure box in the middle, but we need what's inside, so a lovely jaunt through a spiky labyrinth is required to proceed. All while a spiked ceiling slowly lowers itself to impale our heroes if they don't escape in time. It's easy to find the exit with tens of seconds to spare, but if you dilly-dally the clock ticks down to doom and Mario's party gets a free piercing. Another timer-based game over can be triggered in the Great Tree of Boggly Woods, home to the insect-like Jabbies and Punies. The former beings have formed a temporary alliance with the X-Nauts, except for Jabble, he goes his own way, so that they may seize control of the tree. Lord Crump, Grotus's lackey, has been busy searching it for the Emerald Crystal Star left behind in care of the Punies by the aforementioned Goomba hero 1,000 years ago. Crump's made some modifications to streamline the process, like installing machine-operated doors in prison cells to contain those who dare stand in his way. As such, this chapter has a subtle nature versus technology theme going for it that sort of reminds me of Kremkroc Industries Inc. from Donkey Kong Country, a factory built by invaders on the side of DK Island. It's also very reminiscent of the logo used for Shigesato Itoi's Mother 3, its letters consisting of an unnatural mixture of wood and metal designed to be mentally unsettling. The way this mechanical laboratory door was bolted into a living tree is upsetting to look at, because in Itoi's words, you are forcibly coordinating incompatible things and matching them. This is just a normalized aesthetic that makes up our modern world, but it's one of those things where it is discomforting when you really stop to think about it. Timers are also discomforting though. So getting back to that pressing matter, after Crump swipes the Crystal Star from Mario, he tries to exact revenge on him, and all of the Punies who escaped his trap via a remote time bomb he planted inside the tree. You've got precisely 5 minutes to escape a fate of being buried in rubble. And to make things more scarily immersive, the timer persists through dialogue boxes and fights. Once it reaches 0, the screen simply, but effectively fades to white if you're engaged in battle, while violently shaking first with dust falling from the ceiling if you're on the field. The color of the Punies' antennae all turning an alarming red. It's followed by an explosion sound, and the typical game over screen is revealed. To save the tree, and yourself, Crump must be caught up with at the main exit. Thankfully, there's a significant obstacle blocking his escape, that obstacle being the not-so-puny Elder, so Mario and crew are eventually able to back up her bad back, which forces the big goon to deactivate his bomb, giving us plenty of time to trash his robot suit and send his underlings packing. My favorite special game over comes quite a bit later in Chapter 6 aboard the XS Express train. The only cabin that appears to be completely unoccupied is 4, but it's actually haunted. Which checks out, as 4 is an infamously unlucky number in Japan because of its association with death. Using Vivian's veil reveals that it is indeed rooming an invisible passenger, Ghost T, the spirit of a deceased Toad cursed to haunt this room he passed away in many years ago. He's also a prankster, who morbidly jokes that he'll take Mario's life, before seriously explaining that his old diary keeps him tethered to this world, because of his fear that someone will read it. However, he can't leave his cabin, so Mario must help the ghost by returning his confidential journal, without peeking at the no doubt juicy contents within. Strangely, Paper Mario protagonists have a history of reading diaries not intended for their eyes, though curiosity will kill the player if they instigate it. I personally did not hesitate for a single second, as immediately after obtaining the private book, I pried it open and ignored the game's many warnings about its owner cursing me. The game does not reward your bad behavior, as before any saucy secrets are spilled, the screen darkens with an analog horror filter to the tune of a sinister-sounding ambient track. Mario repeatedly nods his head, and Vivian smiles in anticipation, until a scare chord plays and a giant Ghost T suddenly appears to jump scare the two of them. Then a warped circle transition takes us to a game over. This is much scarier than the original version in my opinion, where a regular-sized Ghost T quickly phases in front of Mario, and the screen starts flipping around but with no color changes. One of the absolute best game overs in the series though, next to Super Paper Mario's even more amazing ones, involves our hero uncharacteristically joining the Shadow Queen. His sprite will turn to that of when he's taking control of Mario's body and it's all hunched over with widened black eyes. This quirk was actually restored from the original Japanese version of the game. The English GameCube release among other regions didn't change Mario's pose, so he just continued to stare at her angrily, with his partner not reacting at all. The white text on the black background reading, "For Mario, for Peach, and for the world it was," then fading into the usual game over screen is brilliant and chilling. To go all the way back to the first game over though, we know Hooktail Castle is filled with all sorts of nasty tricks to impede Mario's progress. However, none are nastier than the owner, Hooktail herself. And not just because she can dupe the player with a free foot-smelling session. The localizers doubled down on, with new dialogue revealing that to be the reason Coop's father wound up in her belly. They didn't bring back the line about people paying good money to do this though. No, the devious dragon does more than take a bite out of Mario after accepting her scandalous offer. Whether you fall for her ruse or not, honestly, as a kid, I did say yes to the extra special badge she supposedly had. A low on health Hooktail briefly exits stage left and reappears suddenly to mow down on some toads in the audience. X's form over the eyes of those who were attacked, but it doesn't mean they're dead, as those who have fallen over but avoided the beast's maw get back up and scurry away. You'd think the unlucky toads she's munching on wouldn't survive, especially since the act heals her for 10 HP, but jumping on her head will release the victims from her mouth. What's interesting to note is that the toads will only be freed from attacks to her head, so a player who relied solely on Mario's hammer and Koops' shell toss to finish the fight for example, wouldn't know that they aren't beyond saving. Koops' dad is spit back up no matter what in the end of chapter cutscene, but not the toads. So those who weren't released will have to find a way to crawl out of Hooktail's corpse off screen. Yes, it's implied that Hooktail does die, as her brother Gloomtail later mentions being concerned that his sister hasn't written to him as of late. Don't worry about how he's able to receive mail behind an ancient sealed door. Also, Koopley was in there for 10 years? That is pretty gross to think about, because he would have had to subsist and eat whatever she was digesting. Anyway, the poor audience members attending these boss fights just aren't safe. The idea of a boss sacrificing them to heal shows up again even more brutally for the duel against the Pirate King Cortez and the Shadow Queen. The former is able to absorb their souls in his spirit form, and the latter orders her many dead hands to seize and drag the entire crowd into the Shadow Realm to fully replenish her life force. At least in my Cortez fight, the crowd was asleep when he consumed their essence. On a less macabre, but still disturbing note, Lord Crump abuses the spectators in his last battle, by sucking them up in his Magnus von Grapple 2.0 mech to use as machine gun ammunition. Yes, the game literally says he's armed with machine guns, which surprised me. That's what they are, but I think the writers would want to avoid using the word gun as much as possible. This isn't Sonic Adventure 2, or Shadow the Hedgehog. That's actually it for today though, as in the next episode I'm going to mainly be covering my favorite segment of the entire game, and perhaps the Paper Mario series in general, Chapter 3 of Glitz and Glory. It'll be a big one, and yes, it deserves its own standalone video. I hope you all enjoyed this primer to the dark aspects of the Thousand Year Door. A huge thank you as always to my Patreon members of the PK Love tier: Janssen, Tori, Pangake, Katie, Kathleen, Jennifer, Datberry, Captain Harlock, and Brian and Susan. I'll see you for the next one.